Later, things began to seem slightly less rosy.
It's pouring. It's a pouring beach.
I like it, me.
Oh, look, there's the red light district.
Yeah, that's the Sunnyberg.
Hey, tap up in the water.
Here he goes again.
Must got some abortion and egg puppy death.
Oh, listen, this is the trombone bit.
He's not playing that. He's stuffed, isn't he? He's stuffed.
They're always nice.
Whoop, oh, look at that one go. It's a beauty, that one, isn't it? Put it behind me down. Let's get home, that reminds me of something. Yeah, that's my bag. It's my favourite bit.
Hang on, there's the bloke.
It's my favourite bit. Means it's all over, thank you.
Mind you, some on it.
She's late.
This Monday, the staff at the David Lloyd George School await the arrival of their new head teacher.
I'm not running a day centre. No one will potter around in my school.
I think I like the anarchy.
It's you. You don't know how to teach.
Don't I?
No. All you do is tell me off all the time.
That's not fair.
People think. Well, I'm not.
If our numbers continue to fall, we close.
Chalkface begins Monday at 6:25, continuing Tuesday at 8:30 on BBC2.
In half an hour, we make our final trip of the day to the Crucible Theatre in Sheffield. First on BBC2, Jeremy Paxman presents Newsnight.
Good evening. With the polls closed for only 90 minutes, all three parties are waiting to see what comfort the local elections can provide them and what point us to the date of a general election. At Tory Central Office, they're encouraged by the latest Newsnight poll of polls, which gives them a lead of 3 points. Peter Snow will be giving us all the details later, but at Labour's headquarters, they're predicting a wave of real gains right across the country. The Environment Secretary, his shadow, and the Liberal Democrats' Treasury spokesman are here to react to the first results as they come in. Find out by testing, but what do 7-year-olds think is special about themselves?
Around. Sometimes you don't trip over because you tie your laces up.
Well, the hurly-burly is done, and soon we'll know who's lost and won. The last stages of the campaign saw both the Liberals and the Liberal Democrats and the Tories hinting at the scale of possible Labour gains, doubtless in order later to say they didn't do particularly well. Labour stayed coyly unspecific. Now the polls are closed. They're burning what will soon become the midnight oil at all three party headquarters. Let's go first to Vivian White at Tory Central Office. Vivian.
Hello, Jeremy. The whole exercise here is one of playing down expectations that tonight must necessarily be the tripwire for the general election. Their line up tonight has been that these were local elections on local issues. They frankly couldn't understand why the Labour Party at all its press conferences and its strategy chose to play this as a general election. Perish the idea was the approach from here. But tonight, belying that, Mr. Heseltine, who dished the poll tax first of all and then invented its successor, has been here for an hour. The party chairman and his deputy are here, and so significantly are not just their own computer expert, Keith Brito, but Robert Waller, who for the Harris Opinion Poll organisation does all their independent polling. But the line still is, don't expect this to be the general election night, the tripwire for that. Tonight, after this, as you know, the party chairman, Mr. Patton, is going off for the best reported private weekend in history, spending a quiet weekend with friends rather than taking the election decision himself.
Vivian, thank you very much. John Harrison is down at Labour Party headquarters. What's the mood down there, John?
Well, Jeremy, behind me, the headquarters staff have already got themselves into position to analyse the results as they come in from the regions. They'll be looking for swings, they'll be looking for seats that change control. The campaign coordinator for the Labour Party, Jack Cunningham, has already been talking to us and saying that he's predicting substantial gains. Labour, of course, have quite unashamedly conducted this as a dry run for a general election. They focused on the big national issues of health, education, of course the depth of the recession, and indeed the poll tax and its successor, the council tax. But as for those gains, there are two crucial tests for them. One is, of course, how many new seats do they gain? It won't be enough simply to point to gains of 200 to 300. That won't be enough to be able to boast about a significant momentum working in their favour this side of a general election. The second test will be where they make those gains. They need to move beyond traditional Labour strongholds into the south, the southwest and the Midlands to be able to approach the general election with any confidence. What must worry them, of course, most of all, is that while the Tory party has been through the upheaval of overthrowing Mrs Thatcher, the poll tax issue and so on, they remain at the moment neck and neck with the Labour Party. That's all they are on the polls. That's got to worry them, so we wait to see what happens this evening.
John Harrison, thanks. Let's go down now to the Liberal Democrats' headquarters and Hugh Edwards.
Jeremy, the campaign team here in Cowley Street tell me that they're extremely optimistic about what they call increasing their power and influence. That's been their theme throughout this campaign, increasing that influence in those areas they've targeted, and especially where they're the main challengers to the Conservatives. They're stressing that fact. Now, the problem for the Liberal Democrats is that the old alliance did extremely well back in '87. It made huge gains. And for them to repeat that now, of course, would be a tall order. They have got targets. They're saying that they are looking to win control of areas like Cheltenham, Colchester and Gosport, and to tighten the grip they already have in Ada and Hereford and Berwick. And, of course, they're referring to the big by-election wins they had recently, Eastbourne and Ribble Valley. The big hope here tonight is that they can transfer and convert the big momentum they got there into wins locally. That will be a main strategy for them.
Hugh Edwards, thank you. We'll get back to you later. The problem, of course, for the party leaders is how to work out what the local results mean in national terms. For what it's worth, the bookies still had the Tories as odds-on favourites to win a general election a little earlier tonight. But Peter Snow has slightly firmer evidence with the latest Newsnight poll of polls. Peter.
Good evening, Jeremy. Well, now, before we can analyse the detailed results in the local elections, we do at least have the answer people are giving to the main polling organisations when they're asked the question, how would you vote in a general election tomorrow? Perhaps still the best guide as to what would happen at Westminster if there were a general election. Now, here are the results then of our latest poll of polls tonight. The Conservatives on 42%, Labour on 39%, the Liberal Democrats on 14%, the others on 5%. This is the latest polling done by all the 7 main national polling organisations, a sample of 8,500 people. Some of that polling is published, some of it is not published, and we can't publish the detail of it. All we can publish is the global picture, which shows you a Tory lead of 3% over Labour. Last month it was a 1% Conservative lead. It has now lengthened to 3%. Look back at the trend over the last 5 months. Here we are in November 1990, before Mrs Thatcher had resigned and handed over to John Major. 47% for Labour, 14% ahead of the Conservatives, with the Liberal Democrats down at 14%. Look what's happened over the last 5 months. That 47% for Labour has dropped to 39% tonight. The Tory 33% leapt up when that honeymoon was going on for the Tories in January and February this year. It's dropped a bit now, but it's still up there at 42% above Labour. The Liberal Democrats 14%, popped up a little after the triumph of the Ribble Valley by-election in March, but now it's down again to where it was, 14%. So, the Tories 3% ahead of Labour. That represents this change on the general election of June 1987. The crucial change we need to decide in order to judge what the House of Commons would look like if a general election happened today on this basis. 1% down the Conservatives, 8% up Labour, 9% down the Liberal Democrats on what the Alliance scored in the June 87 general election. And that would see a House of Commons like this. Over on the right there, the Liberal Democrats, the others with 24, the Liberal Democrats under Perry Ashdown with 11, half the number they have at the moment, mostly up here in Scotland. Mr Kinnock's Labour Party with 286, the Tories under John Major with 329, and that would be a Conservative majority, a clear majority of just 8 in the new House of Commons. Well, that then is our poll of polls. That is the polling organisations telling us what Westminster would look like if there were a general election today. Now, I'm joined now by our political correspondent, Peter Kellner, who will tell us how we're going to be able to analyse the very preliminary indications of the local votes coming in tonight. Peter, how's it going?
What we're doing is looking at key wards, Tory marginal wards in those parts of the country which will decide the next general election. We've just got a scattering in so far. Half a dozen. The Conservatives have held 3, they've lost 3. In all 6 wards, there has been a clear swing to Labour, some quite modest, 1 or 2 quite big. If it carries on, it's very early, but if it carries on, then I think we're going to get a result not dissimilar from that poll of polls. And if that's right, I think, as my Australian friends would say, the prospects of a June election are down the gurgler.
And how long do we wait before we have a much clearer picture of how the local voting is panning out in share of the vote for the parties?
I think within the next half hour we'll begin to get a broad national picture. But beyond that, of course, there are all going to be all sorts of regional variations that politicians will be looking for, how the Liberal Democrats are doing in different parts of the country, whether there's tactical voting. There's an awful lot to be uncovered as the night wears on, but in the next half hour the broad national picture should begin to become clear.
Right, Peter, thank you very much. Back to you, Jeremy.
Well, now, that was Peter Kellner and Peter Snow. With us in the studio now, the Environment Secretary Michael Heseltine, his shadow Brian Gould, and Alan Beath of the Liberal Democrats. Let's be frank about it, we don't know what has happened so far in these elections, but what we can say is that these are the first elections, of course, clearly, which took place in the post-Thatcher era. What sort of a difference has that made to these elections, Brian Gould?
It certainly made a difference, but I think the one thing that Peter Snow's little graph didn't demonstrate was that the most important difference occurred, as one would expect, as soon as the change of leadership took place. And from a substantial deficit, the Tories suddenly leapt into a 10 or 12% lead. What has happened over the last 5 months is that that lead has been pegged back, and we are
still 3 points behind the latest poll of polls.
I think you'll find that poll of polls included that notoriously rogue poll, which
it included seven other polls too.
Of course,
some of them unpublished.
Of course, no doubt, but it no doubt also included the 10% lead of the Tories, which most pollsters have discounted. So I think we're entitled to say that we're running neck and neck, and we expect a very good night tonight. I notice already, for example, we've picked up one seat in Derby, which is a crucial area for us, where we have some hopes, and that's an extremely encouraging augury.
I should perhaps explain for the benefit of our viewers that you're both sitting here with bleepers on your desk which are giving you these results, which have you seem to have to hand so readily. Alan Beath, you're presumably going to tell us about another gain that you've made, but can you be more specific about this question? What difference did it make having a different leader in the Tory party?
Well, yes, after I've recorded that we did indeed make a gain in Devon, in one of the first results announced. We won a by-election.
That doesn't really prove very much.
Oh, it proves we're doing well where we want to do well. But we won a by-election. We won a by-election before Mrs. Thatcher went, which contributed to her departure. We then won a by-election after John Major had replaced her. And the departure of Mrs. Thatcher doesn't seem to have stopped the momentum of improvement that we have shown from a point a year ago when people were writing us off as a political party to a point now where I think we will show tonight that we're doing consistently better than any of the opinion polls suggest.
Strike you as very different sort of campaign, Michael Heseltine?
I think that we won't have a good Conservative night tonight. We're expecting to see the Labour Party do rather well. And I think the important judgment that we've had to make, and the Prime Minister's insistent on it, is that we take the difficult decisions and the tough decisions, and we don't go for sort of short-term opportunism. We think that when the general election comes, having won the battle against inflation will be an essential part of our campaign. And we can't run away from the difficult choices now in order just to sort of try and, doctor the local election results.
And just to go back to this question of Mrs. Thatcher, what sort of a role do you think she ought to play in a general election campaign?
Well, I know that Mrs. Thatcher will give loyal service to the Conservative Party. I have not the slightest doubt how she does it.
What sort of role do you think she should be deployed in?
It is ludicrous for you to expect me to try and have an answer to that question. I haven't thought about it. I won't be called on to think about it, but Mrs. Thatcher will.
Everyone else in your party has thought about it.
That may well be, but no one has asked me to think about it, and I don't intend to try now, even to make your programme more exciting than it otherwise will be. But the fact of the matter is that Mrs. Thatcher will think about it, and I haven't the slightest doubt she will give her committed support to the Conservative Party.
Brian Gould, there's a lot of talking up of your prospects going on in order that presumably they can be talked down if they are less good than other parties predict.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. It's worth bearing in mind that when our opponents tell us that we are going to win 600 seats, no party has made that sort of gain in any local election on the current boundaries. So I think what is happening is that we're being offered some very high hurdles to jump, so that if we were to fail to clear them, it would be claimed that we had not been as successful as we should be. I expect that we will do well on a broad front, but we're not making specific predictions, although, as I say, I am very encouraged by these early results. What I thought was interesting, incidentally, about what Michael Heseltine had to say, and I accept that it's not his job necessarily to be thinking about electoral strategy, but what I think has happened over the last couple of weeks is that no one appears to have been thinking about the Tory electoral strategy. I think they ran a very negative and lackluster campaign, which
Oh,
doesn't
you'd be
at all...
bound to say that.
No, I think almost everybody... They held just 3 press conferences, for example.
They
didn't at any... Oh, yes.
You're not seriously worried about whether they ran a lackluster
I'm not worried
campaign
about it.
I'm
I'm simply making that point, that I think that as a trial run, if you like, for the general election, it doesn't augur terribly well. And Chris Patten, I think, has had a very uneasy time. I don't know whether Michael Heseltine has tried to help him at all, but they haven't been able to get a single Tory councillor onto their press conferences, for example, during the local election campaign, and I think that's very remarkable.
Neither of your bleepers are giving you any new information,
True, as a matter of fact, as you will remember from our opening press conference.
Right.
But the accuracy has never worried Brian Gould.
We're going to leave it there because our viewers will have plenty of time to see you throughout this evening. Thank you very much for the moment. In a moment, the secret life of a 7-year-old, the child's world no government test can explore. But first, some of today's other main news stories. A body believed to be that of the Oxford student Rachel McLean has been found by the police under the floorboards of her house in Oxford. A man has been arrested in Nottingham. Britain is to donate £2.5 million worth of aid to the victims of the cyclone in Bangladesh. Labour has said it's not enough. The official death toll has now reached 37,000, but the Bangladeshi government estimate that as many as 100,000 people may have died. American congressional leaders are to discuss claims that Ronald Reagan's election campaign team persuaded Iranian militants not to release American hostages until after the 1980 presidential election. It's alleged the delay was intended to ensure President Carter's defeat. Quick look at the markets. In London, the 100-share index closed at 2530, up 22 points. In New York, the Dow ended the day at 2938, up 8. Against the Deutschmark, the pound finished at 2 marks, 95.84, up a pfennig, while against the dollar it closed at 172.20, up just over a cent. Robert Fisk, the Middle East correspondent of the Independent newspaper, has been arrested tonight by Turkish secret police. His detention comes after a number of articles severely critical of the Turkish government's handling of the Kurdish refugee crisis. Godfrey Hodgson, the foreign editor of the Independent, was on the telephone to Fisk when he was arrested.
Well, I spoke to Robert Fisk earlier in eastern Turkey, and then the phone rang, this phone here, in fact, and I picked it up, and there was something slightly strange about his voice. And he said, I'm in my hotel room, there are 3 Turkish policemen here, and they're arresting me. And he then started interviewing the policeman through the hotel manager who was interpreting, saying, who sent you here, on what authority, what's your name? And finally, the policeman got fed up. They realized what was happening, and they brought the whole thing to a close. He hung up. Afterwards, I gather, as he was being hustled into a car and taken to the police station, he said this is the kind of thing that happens in neighboring countries like Iraq.
Godfrey Hodgson of the Independent. 7 years and 6 months, said Humpty Dumpty to Alice, an uncomfortable sort of age. Now, if you'd asked my advice, I'd have said leave off at 7, but it's too late now. It's not uncommon to find 7-year-olds who think they're the centre of the world. It's less common to find the rest of the world believes it too. Feelings are running so high about the government's insistence on compulsory testing of 7-year-olds in school that in some parts of the country, parents are staging mass boycotts while teachers say the tests are just impracticable. We've heard politicians by the wagon load on the subject, so Newsnight's Mark Easton decided to try to see the world from the point of view of the average 7-year-old.
Let's go, let's move it! I'm scared of heights, you know? Well, I'm not!
How can the adult mind enter the world of the 7-year-old? Can we define what it means to be 7?
No, but that's a quicker way! We don't need to climb. No, this way. Yes, we can.
To the Greeks, it was the age of reason. To the Jesuits, it was the time by which the character had been formed. Fascination with the 7-year-old mind stems from an almost universal notion that this is an age of transition.
Okay.
The year when they're likely to start exploring in earnest the complex social world around them.
When I go down to my friend's house, I've got to go down the road and be responsible for my sister. When I was 6, I wasn't allowed to take. I wasn't trustworthy enough. You feel big, and when you're running around, sometimes you don't trip over because you tie your laces up.
When I was 6,
and I was asking Mummy, "Oh, Mummy, can I join that club over there?" And she said, "No, you can't, not until you're 7. Can't do this until you're 7. You can't do that until you're 7.
It's an age of great passions. It's the age of the best friend, the discovery of friendship and the discovery of what it takes to maintain friendships. It's the recognition of the development of the self, recognition that you're beginning to get some freedom and beginning to give them some choice in life. It's the time at which you begin to measure yourself against your peers. It's a time of awakening, if you like.
The silly old man from China, also to make it
Normally, by the age of 7, a child's body is more than 70% of its adult size. Coordination is good enough to skip and catch with ease. They can tie their own shoelaces, tell the time, and are likely to cut their first adult teeth. The brain is almost fully grown, and history is littered with examples of apparently precocious 7s with extraordinary skills. John Stuart Mill was reading Aesop's fables in the original Greek. Mozart, influenced by a pushy father, was writing this sonata. Evidence shows that we can and do design our children. Parents who send their offspring to the Suzuki Violin School, for example, invite teachers to promote musical abilities. Although none of these 7-year-olds are budding Mozarts, they do show a competence well above average. And there's no doubt that different social and cultural pressures can produce widely different achievements.
Bonjour, monsieur. Bonjour, mon garçon.
Pupils at this school are taught French from the age of 3, and by 7 are playing shopkeepers in a foreign language. But in different circumstances, youngsters of this age are expected to be real traders, buying and selling on the streets of some third world city, simply to stay alive.
You could probably take more or less anything and teach it to a 7-year-old, providing you split it up simply enough. Of course, the children may not see the need for learning about some complicated nuclear physics or something, and obviously motivation's an important thing. But I think there are many more things we could teach to 7-year-olds if we needed to and if we wanted to.
Lisa, we're going to play
Psychologists, though, argue that however well we teach them, there are still some important mental breakthroughs that children of this age won't yet have made. Peter Bryant has a series of tests to measure children's intellectual development.
Let's say the blue line is yours, okay, and the yellow one's mine. Now, what I'd like to know is, do we have the same number of bricks in our lines, or does one of us have more than the other? What do you think?
I have more than you.
Really? Why do you think that?
Because one's shorter, one's longer.
Uh-huh. What do you think?
That one's got more than...
Uh-huh. Why do you think that? Their first reaction is simply to look at them. And I think that that shows that they don't appreciate completely yet the power of counting. They can, they're not really quite sure yet when counting helps. Within a few months they'll know. But this happens to be the time, around about 7 years, when they begin to understand the power of counting. So you put that there, and I'll put that here.
In this test, scales are used to convince the child that 2 balls of plasticine are the same weight.
Good. Let's take them out now. Could you
But what happens when one of them is changed?
I'm going to take one of these. I'll take this one. And I'm going to change it. I'm going to make it into a sausage. Long sausage. Hmm? Now, what I want to do is to put that one in that tray, and that one in this tray. But could you tell me first, what do you think will happen?
Heaviest.
This one will be the heaviest, do you think?
This one will go down this house.
That will be. Do you think that will be heavier? Shall we try it out? Would you like to put that in that cup, and I'll put that in?
Most 7-year-olds have failed to grasp the relationship between shape and weight. In fact, psychologists say it'll be 2 or 3 years before the average child crosses this conceptual bridge.
So that's that case.
In this test, the child is asked to draw a cup, deliberately placed so that they can't see the handle. Some 7-year-olds, though, are unable to resist drawing it in. Without it, they'd argue, they simply haven't drawn a cup. Cups have handles. While this child shows primitive drawing skills, she has grasped the convention of drawing what you see rather than what you know. And this boy's picture demonstrates an advanced understanding of perspective. But such tests can only tell us half the story of how 7s are developing. They're also making huge leaps in their social maturity. 7 is the age of friendships.
Whenever you're alone and you want someone, they should be there and ready to help you. I think the same. Every day you can nearly play with them. Sometimes I see my best friend at the park. And we always play head and my friend makes me laugh.
With younger children, children 4, 5, 6, the friendships are very, very much a matter of who happens to be there in your situation at the time, and particularly if they smile at you. So it's a very transient affair, and friends change as quickly as activities and faces change. For the 7-year-old, though, there's a much more enduring sense of friendship, and the idea of the best friend is beginning to emerge.
Get these kind of leaves and pretend they're plates.
The 7-year-old, much more so than the 5-year-old, is able to imagine how they appear from somebody else's point of view.
Well, we're not exploring down here, we're exploring up, down. Well, I'm going
Equipped
down.
with a new social confidence then, 7-year-olds tend to split up into small but fiercely loyal groups, usually dividing into the girls and the boys. Have you got a name for your gang yet?
Yeah, Rambo first. No. Yeah, but we need a better name than that. Something like the Devils or something. Okay, the Devils. The Devils. The Red Blood Devils. Remember, you're pineapple, and you're apple, and you're blackberry.
It's a time for getting to grips with the conventions of social play acting. They've discovered that their public face can be different from their private one, and that often results in a magnification of traditional stereotypes.
I don't like them too much because they're always fighting. They're not as tough as boys. If I went over and punched my friend, he wouldn't really mind, but if I went over and punched a girl, they'll probably go crying. They're terrors. Girls. And they get on your nerves, but girls are spiteful. No, we don't need sticks for the girls. No, we do. No, we don't. Bash the tank down.
7-year-olds have developed a curiosity about the opposite sex, which means that having divided into separate groups, they then look for excuses to meet each other.
Come on, let's go.
Chasing games allow them to remain loyal to their own group, while trying to unravel some of the mysteries of the opposite sex.
Get out! Get out! We're gonna see! Yeah, well, it's unfair, we didn't
They don't yet recognise the power of the social tools they're beginning to use.
I wouldn't care if it was the Queen of England's camp. Oh, yes, she'll tell you off. Yeah. I wouldn't care if she'll tell you off. She might put you in the dungeon. She wouldn't go in any camp. Because the different dressing she's wearing.
7-year-olds' play still includes much aping of grown-ups, people who seem to possess almost magical powers and freedoms.
They can sort of do anything they want to. Well, you're just sitting around. Go and do this and you've got to do that. You have to get a job. Otherwise, golly, how am I going to live? And so you've got to get out there and find a job, and sometimes you're fired, so you've got to be boss so that you don't get fired, and it's much harder. When I grow up, I want to work in a school. When my sister grows up, she wants to smoke. I'm not going to smoke, because it's bad for your gums. If you're about, and your teeth go brown, 15, and you smoke, you can die quickly.
7s are just beginning to think about abstract ideas, like what happens when you die.
Yeah, we've had a dead thing and we buried it. Yeah.
A few will have firm convictions as a result of some personal experience, but the majority will still be trying to make sense of the ideas they've heard from adults.
When you Tayo, going a little thing, and it's called
Coffin?
And when you stay in there for long, you change into a skeleton and you go up to God. I think you just lay there and you don't do nothing. God sends you up to heaven. No, I don't think that's right. I do. I do? Yeah, I do, because my fish went up to there. We threw it out the window and the next day it was gone. Oh, done it!
We can watch them, we can measure them, and we can test them. But a study of 7-year-olds can only ever be a snapshot. They're making so many intellectual, conceptual, and social discoveries that adults will never be able to define the business of being 7.
That report was by Mark Easton. Well, now, the local election results are beginning to trickle in. Peter Kellner in our election studio has been doing a little analysis of some of the key marginal seats. Peter, is there a pattern emerging so far?
A pattern is beginning to emerge, Jeremy. We've got results from 18 key marginal Conservative wards, adding up to about 57,000 votes. So things could move around a bit as the evening progresses. But it's already clear that Labour is making gains. It has taken 11 of those 18 wards. Overall, Labour's share of the vote is up around 7 points on May 1987, the last time these wards were contested, with both the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats losing votes. If that pattern does settle down at around that level, that does suggest, like recent opinion polls, that nationally, Conservative and Labour are very much level pegging.
But what about the pressure that the Tories may be under from the Liberal Democrats? How are they doing?
Well, where we have indications of where the Liberal Democrats were third last time, they seem to be losing votes. But we are hearing that in Rochford, in Essex, where the Liberal Democrats needed to take 6 wards to take control of that council, they seem to be on course for doing that. Well, that's one indicator from just one council. But it may be that the Liberal Democrats are doing what Paddy Ashdown said they might do, which is they might not do brilliantly nationally, but they might do very well where they have a strong local base. That's one of the things we'll be looking out for as the evening goes on.
Peter Kellner, thank you. It's early days, of course, but that is all from Newsnight for tonight, because we've got to hand over our gallery to the people doing the special election programme, which begins on BBC1 in 5 minutes. Breakfast news will be here at 6:30 in the morning, but for the moment, from all of us on the programme, a very good night to you.
And incidentally, tonight's local election results will be available throughout the night on BBC One's CEEFAX, page 700.
This city can't afford 3 profitable evening newspapers. Somebody will have to go.
A battle for power.
It won't be the greatest newspaper in the world, but with your help, we'll have an issue out on the streets at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon.
An ambitious, ruthless drive to build a media empire. The Paperman, Wednesday, 9:25 on 2.
Now on BBC2, we return to the World Snooker Championship in Sheffield.
He's won it 6 times. He's come very close. The best player never to have won it. And the man who's knocked out this year's big favourite. One of the most intriguing semi-final lineups we've ever had here at the Embassy Snooker Championship of the world. Welcome back to our final programme here on day 13. The semi-final between Jimmy White and Steve James. Jimmy White 3-1 up after a sparkling 39 minutes. Here's the next they play, and it's Steve James to break.